So, Donna is asking for bond again. Hello, my true crime lovelies. How are you? I hope you are well. My name is Tanika. Thanks for clicking on Tanika's 2 cents. If you are new here, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back, lovelies. I hope you are in life as lovely as you are in my mind. Okay, so we're going to talk about Donna Adelson. She's got a hearing today, pretrial conference, and I was going to do a live, but I can't find a feed. So first, it all works out. It works out perfectly because I want to give you an update. The last time I actually created a whole video dedicated to Donna was when she was trying to take it up the road to get another venue, right? But they haven't tested if they can get a fair jury pool in Tallahassee. So I'm surmising that that's going to be denied. The judge has not ruled on that yet. But yesterday, because I was digging through the files and to prep for today, and there was a new filing. So I'm not going to do a summary. I know I try to recap it a little bit at the top if you're new to the Adelson family, because there's a document I'm going to go through, and it point by point goes through it. But in short, Donna Adelson is charged for the murder of her her son-in-law, Dan Markell, who was a professor at the Florida State University in the Florida State University Law Department, and he was married once upon a time to Wendy Adelson, who was, or still is, as far as I know, Donna's daughter. Okay, let me get into it here. So Donna is asking for bond again. I did the little snippet last week where she talked about where the judge actually had to tell her to stop talking. It was a snippet off of another video, and I added it because I was like, I need it in the Adelson playlist. So after that, she came back to talk to the judge, and she alleged, or I don't know if she talked to the judge, there were more allegations that she was being extorted. And then I heard she got moved into protective custody the day after her birthday, which was last Wednesday. However, her lawyers then came back and said, but she can't do her art class or talk to friendly inmates in there. So instead of doing art class and talking to friendly inmates while in protective custody, she wants none of it. She wants to be out and in Tallahassee with her husband, Harvey. So it sounds like he did make it out of the Miami International Airport. It would kind of be interesting to be MIA from MIA, right? Okay. Enough of my yammer. Let me tell you what I know. So Judge Everett has set a bond hearing for her. They're claiming that she's been undergoing ongoing jail abuse, hailing as far back as October, to which I say, girl, what was you waiting on? I think it was October 7th, she said. And basically some roughneck was in there roughing her up and told her, you better get some commissary money for me or you might have some broken bones. And so allegedly, Donna talked to Harvey, had him send in packages, and the packages are near Donna's bunk. But let's do the blow by blow, shall we? Okay. So she's alleging physical abuse and extortion. She's asking to be released on bond pending her trial on charges that she helped orchestrate the murder of Dan Markell. One of her charges is murder. In fact, let me just read you. She is charged with murder, first degree, conspiracy to commit first degree murder, and solicitation to commit first degree murder. So she's been busy. She's been a busy bee, along with her son's ex-girlfriend and the ex-girlfriend's baby daddy. So Catherine McBanois, Sigfredo Garcia, who is her boyfriend. Catherine is the one who was with Charlie and with Sigfredo. And then Charlie. So far, everyone else who's been charged in the conspiracy has been convicted. It took them twice to get Katie. She had full immunity. She was offered full immunity and she turned it down. Okay, in a motion filed Friday, Adelson's lawyer said that the 75-year-old is suffering from a variety of medical issues, from shortness of breath to pain from injuries she suffered during an attack by another inmate who has been extorting her. Her attorneys, Josh Zellman and Jackie Fulford of Tallahassee, wrote that she has experienced other instances of abuse at the jail, that she is getting only a couple of hours of sleep each night, and she hasn't been able to converse with her lawyers because of jail noise and hearing issues. I wonder if they mean on the phone, because wouldn't you be able to just come in person and talk to her? They're all in Tallahassee. Her health is failing. She is in constant pain, cannot hear normal discussions, and she is not receiving a fraction of the amount of sleep necessary to assist in her defense. Okay, pick a side. She has time for art classes, but not to sleep. Maybe take a blanket into art class. Multitask, Donna. Meanwhile, her lawyers filed a separate motion seeking to block potential bombshell evidence in the case, namely a jailhouse phone call with her son, Charlie Adelson, on November 7th. That was the call that broke the internet when she was, they have been having problems where he would call and it would sound like it would drop and Donna would hold and it would come back on. So this is an instance where she thought it sounded like he had dropped, but that he had not really dropped. And so she was waiting for him to come back on the line. Well, it's still recording because it didn't fully disconnect, right? He's not listening anymore. Whatever happened on his end, it didn't click. I don't know, child. I don't work at the jail. I don't work for Mobile, but whatever it was. And so she said she was thinking about unaliving herself. She's had a good run. She's done what she wanted to do, or she's thinking about going to a non-extradition country so that the U.S. wouldn't bring her back, or they couldn't bring her back. It was everything. It was everything. She was talking about moving money, getting things set up for the kids. She was trying to get Wendy over there. She even said she was going to try to make a run for it because she never said Rashbaum's name, I don't believe, but I think she referenced him. I'll have to find it and we'll listen to it together because I'd be interested. It's been over a year since I heard it in 2023. So if you haven't heard it, we can listen to it together. If you have, maybe you can put me up on some things that you heard that I may have missed. So it is just balls of a burglar, this woman, balls of a burglar. Rashbaum allegedly, potentially told her, you could try. Right? You could try. And what they are thinking down there, because there was a grand jury that would be convening. I can't remember how we know that, if it's rumor, conjecture, or fact, but I feel like there was somewhere I heard that Wednesdays is when they convene the grand jury. And so they were going through that process and then they sped it up. Right. That morning they started getting on it, they being the police in Tallahassee and the Florida State Police. And so they went to Judge Everett to get the warrant. And luckily they caught her on the runway. Right.
Why don't I have
that alone, I think, should keep her from being able to get a bond, honestly. But the lawyer was saying, and we'll get into it, she doesn't have her passport. She doesn't have that. Actually, let's pull that up. I'm going to keep showing you guys the pictures and I'll just read, I think. And I'm still trying to figure out a nice place for us to save our documents that we share. Okay, let's actually look at this together. That way you guys can see what I'm seeing. Okay, defendant's motion to set bond and schedule an Arthur hearing. And this was filed on the 7th, so Friday. The defendant, Donna S. Adelson, by and through undersigned counsel and pursuant to Section 903 Florida Statute State v. Arthur and Florida Rule of Criminal Procedure 3.131, moves this honorable court to schedule an Arthur hearing and in support thereof, and as grounds, therefore, says as following. So procedural history. Mrs. Adelson was arrested on November 13th, 2023, and on November 15th, she was indicted for first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and solicitation to commit first-degree murder. The bond amount listed on each warrant for these charges indicated FAR for first appearance required. At first appearance, Mrs. Adelson was denied bond on count 1, and bond was set in the amount of $25,000 for counts 2 and 3. And that was there was conditions on 2 and 3, right? She couldn't have contact with the victims, and we wondered if that included the Markel boys, Dan's sons. On or around December 5th, December 5th, 2023, the original counsel for Mrs. Adelson filed an emergency motion to enjoin the jail for an independent psychological evaluation or release to house arrest based on alleged violations of Mrs. Adelson's Sixth Amendment right to counsel. A hearing was held on said motion on December 11th. Oh, that was the hearing of all hearings. You guys remember that was, what's her name? The attorney Descalzo, and she was like yelling and angry, and she couldn't get a hold of anyone. And the only way she got to talk to her client was because Mrs. Kappelman and Mrs. Dugan helped her get in, the prosecution. All fire and brimstone. And Mrs. Adelson was in the back or next to her, what? And the judge had to tell her then, Mrs. Adelson, you need to calm yourself. Yeah, I don't know what was going on. Okay, on January 8th, a motion for substitution of counsel was filed, which was granted on January 9th, 2024. We were there for that. Oh no, I didn't have my channel yet. I'm thinking January of 2025. But no, we were there when Rashbaum had to step out. So due to the conflict of interest, Mrs. Adelson's pretrial confinement in the Leon County was extended for approximately 9 months to await a new trial date. This seems weird, okay? Because the attorney that became counsel for Mrs. Adelson was withdrawn from the case due to a conflict of interest on the eve of trial, September 17th. So this, you and I covered on this channel, that hearing that day. This must have been swapping out Descalza for Rashbaum in January of 2024, because that was a year ago. So due to the conflict of interest, Mrs. Adelson's pretrial confinement in the Leon County Jail was extended for, 9 months. The state of Florida has not filed a motion for pretrial detention. The trial in this case is scheduled to begin with jury selection on June 3rd, 2025. You and I will be there. General statements of fact. On July 18th, 2014, Dan Markel was killed while sitting in his car in the garage of his Tallahassee home. Oh gosh, those are always hard. Professor Markel was a prominent law professor at the FSU College of Law. The Tallahassee Police Department began an extensive investigation which involved the FBI and law enforcement officers in multiple jurisdictions. So you had Miami, you had Tallahassee, and probably anywhere in between. On July 17th, 2015, Tallahassee Police Department released new details in the investigation. On May 25th, 2016, almost a year later, Sigfredo Garcia was arrested in the case. On or about June 28th, 2016, Luis Rivera was arrested in this case. Yeah, May, then June goes Rivera. Catherine McBanoa was arrested on October 1, 2016. On October 4th, 2016, Luis Rivera pled guilty to second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 19 years in prison, concurrent with his 12-year sentence in a federal RICO case. Sigfredo Garcia was convicted during a joint trial with McBanoa in October 2019. Catherine McBanoa was retried and convicted in May 2022. 2016, you have a guilty plea. October 2019, Sigfredo is convicted. Then you have McBanoa convicted in May of 2022. And then Charlie in 23. Shortly before her second trial, Charlie was arrested on April 21st and then convicted. He was arrested April 21st, 2022, and then he was convicted November. So over a year. I know his birthday passed in there. His birthday was during the trial. Yeah, you guys remember, because what's her face was like, happy birthday. We didn't know what she said. What's her name? June. 1 week after Charlie's conviction, over 9 years after the homicide that took the life of Dan Markel, Mrs. Adelson was arrested at Miami International Airport, MIA. Ooh, that was a long time coming. I can't even imagine how the Markels felt of finally, because they know what's happened. It's clear for anyone who knows the facts of the case. And Yeah. The facts upon which the state of Florida indicted Mrs. Adelson, she was indicted for murder, capital felony, conspiracy to commit, which is a first-degree felony, solicitation to commit, which is a first-degree felony, include substantially that Mrs. Adelson made derogatory comments about her son-in-law during the course of the divorce proceedings between her daughter and Dan Markel prior to the homicide, that she spoke to both her son Charlie and her daughter Wendy Adelson on the morning of the homicide, that law enforcement conducted a bump demanding money from Mrs. Adelson after the homicide, which you guys know, Judge Everett knows all of this already, right? Because he heard the case of Charlie Adelson, but they're making an accurate record to recap all this in case there's an appeal, or in case there's an appeal. So she didn't pay the demand money, that she signed paychecks out of her son's business at his direction to Catherine McBanawa after the homicide took place, and that she attempted to vacation in Vietnam, a country that does not extradite, more than 9 years after the homicide. So they are saying, this is the defense who's writing this, right? They're saying they feel like it's a stretch that 9 years later after the homicide, that it would be interpreted that she was going to Vietnam for anything other than vacation. But man, we have the recordings. Of course, they're going to try to get those recordings suppressed. So that's also one of the things that they filed. Incarceration issues, medical issues of Miss Adelson. She's a 75-year-old female with typical medical issues of aging, exacerbated by the conditions of confinement. You know what, Mrs. Adelson? You know how you avoid that? Don't do crimes. Hearing problems that are compounded due to a medical issue that cannot be addressed by medical personnel at the Leon County Detention Facility. Prior to her incarceration, she saw an ENT every 3 to 4 months to have her extremely small ear canals cleaned out with proper equipment, as general flushing will not resolve her issue. Really? Severe pain from a pre-existing medical condition in her back and legs that cannot be relieved by the medical care available at the Leon County Detention Facility, and excruciating pain in her left shoulder, down her arm, and into her hand as a result of an injury received during an attack by another inmate at the detention facility. Within the past few months, Mrs. Adelson has begun experiencing shortness of breath that has reached the level where others comment about hearing her struggle to breathe. Undersigned counsel has actually had difficulty hearing phone communications with Mrs. Adelson because her breathing is so labored that it interferes with phone reception. I hope they bring her into court today. I want to see this labored breathing. We speed it up and it'll be like, you can tell. If she's ill, I feel bad for her as I would for any ill person, but I don't feel sympathy for her plight of like, oh, she's ill and she's in jail, because she at least put herself in a questionable situation to be thought of as a murderer. I'm not saying she did it, innocent until proven guilty, but there's enough evidence that points to that. I mean, listen, I haven't heard her defense. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation, and maybe her children plotted against her to take the fall, but Charlie missed the plot. Okay. Oddly enough, when Mrs. Adelson was having a medical visit with the doctor at the detention center prior to February 3rd, 2025, the doctor refused to even listen to Mrs. Adelson's chest because that was not the reason we are here, and you will need to get another appointment with the physician's assistant. In other words, I'm busy. On Saturday, February 1, 2025, in the early morning hours, Mrs. Adelson was in the bathroom area and accidentally bumped up against the washing machine, cutting herself on her right arm on a rusted metal bar on the machine. The washing machine is in the bathroom area. I guess they only have one water supply, and she cut herself on a rusted. But in general, I think older people bruise easily and cut easily, like their skin is dry. As I'm getting older, I notice. I mean, I've always bruised like a peach, but they have real staying power now. The nurse was in the pod, so Mrs. Adelson showed it to the nurse, who told her how bad it looked, but said she had no Band-Aid. Ma'am, if it's really that bad, a Band-Aid's gonna help? You're making it like you might need a tetanus shot. The nurse told her to wrap it in toilet paper so the bleeding would stop, and then to fill out a sick call form to request a Band-Aid and turn it in with the night nurse. Oh my God. That would be there around midnight. So what time are we when this is all happening? We don't give a time. Of course, these are all Donna's retelling to her attorney. I'm sure there's someone here for dramatic effect. Do I think it didn't happen? I don't think she's totally making it up. I'm sure there's cameras and whatnot, but I mean, How bad is a cut if a Band-Aid will help? Do you know what I mean? Like, you're not getting even a butterfly Band-Aid or a stitch or a I don't know. A sergeant sent a Band-Aid down for Mrs. Adelson and also provided sick call forms. See, that doesn't make sense. Like, wouldn't you need at least 5? Don't you have to change out the dirty bandages? Like, are we on Band-Aid ration? So she filled it out, which Mrs. Adelson filled out, requesting that each of her medical issues, including the cut, be addressed. On Monday, February 3rd, Mrs. Adelson was finally taken to the medical unit. Her wound was cleaned and she received a tetanus shot. See, that I feel like you should have done straight away. Mrs. Adelson needs medical care that simply cannot be obtained at the detention facility. Don't do crimes. She needs an appointment with an ear, nose, and throat specialist, an orthopedist, and a physical therapist at a minimum. If she remains incarcerated pending trial, the defense will need to prepare motions to seek permission for Mrs. Adelson to receive the care outside of the Leon County Detention Center and obtain a court order for each appointment to be scheduled. I say start on that right away. And then if she is out, she's out. But like get her to the ENT if that's really a legitimate concern, or get them to her, however that works, which would then require jail personnel. Oh, she would leave personnel to transport Mrs. Adelson to her appointments. Obtaining proper medical care would result in a hardship for Leon County Detention Center and its staff. So, Judge, we're thinking of the Leon County Jail. It's not really about Mrs. Adelson here. We don't want to be an inconvenience. Attorney-client privilege it is impossible for Mrs. Adelson to engage in attorney-client privilege communications via phone communication while incarcerated in the Leon County Detention Center. I've been hearing more and more lately that even attorneys don't want to talk on those recorded or non-recorded lines because it's a digital system and it could accidentally be recorded, or somebody could be actively listening but not recording it. So I'm hearing more and more as I watch about different cases, specifically in Florida, but I guess it would apply other places, is that somebody's always listening. You want to go in person for those like real like strategy questions or strategic planning meetings, theory leads. You don't want to do that on the phone. It is difficult at best for her attorneys to hear Mrs. Adelson when she speaks due to the enormous amount of background noise caused by static, phone connection issues on the tablet, and noise from the inmates in the background. Okay, so reasonably, like, let's play both sides of this and see what could be going on. So they are new attorneys, so it's not like they have all the background, right? So like if Rashbaum said this, I would say, he knows what the facts of the case are. Given that they're new attorneys, they probably do need to have, quite a bit of conversation at this point as they get ready for trial. I just don't know, like, is she supposed to be giving a dissertation? Is it a yes or no? I mean, I could see it going both ways. It hasn't been a complaint before, but again, it's a different attorney, and she's saying her health is declining and her life is being threatened, which I think is the most, because their solution is solitary confinement, but then she's alone and probably going stir crazy. So they're saying, well, we'll get to that. Once Mrs. Adelson ended the call, Mrs. Adelson has had to get onto her bed and cover her head with her blanket so that she can hear counsel and counsel can hear her. On one recent occasion, when Mrs. Adelson ended the call and pulled the covers off of her head, there was a guard standing over her listening to her phone call. Another inmate reported that the guard stood there listening for several minutes of the call. Once Mrs. Adelson ended the call, the guard proceeded to search all of Mrs. Adelson's items and discarded the headphones she uses to listen to the recorded materials related to her case. Recorded phone calls. Okay, it's been over a year, ma'am. You should have listened to those. We listened to them in a week. Lack of sleep. The schedule maintained for providing food and medication to the inmates of the Leon County Detention Center results in Mrs. Adelson sleeping on average 2 hours each 24-hour period, and many times much less than that. I say cut out those, the creative writing, the art class. A typical day for Mrs. Adelson is as follows. Nighttime medication distribution, 11:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. Oh, wow. Sleep commences after inmates quiet down, 1:30 a.m., awaken for breakfast at 3:30 a.m. Not to be dunce, but what is she doing before 11:30? What time is dinner? And then what time the medication? You don't have time to sleep before that? You're waiting. Come on now. That doesn't even make sense. Lay awake in dark on bed until lunch served, 9:30 a.m. Oh my gosh, 9:30 a.m. for lunch. Lay awake in dark on bed until lights on, 3:30 p.m. Oh no, is that in the solitary confinement? Possibly leave bed and walk around in circles for exercise, depending on who the guard is. Dinner is served at 6 p.m. Back on bunk until nighttime medication. Wait, so she's back on the bunk till 12. What time did we say the medication was? 11:30. That doesn't make sense then. Let me just show you guys what I'm looking at here. If she's back on bunk until nighttime medication at midnight, but medication is passed from 11:30 to, so I guess she waits until midnight. She doesn't get in the line at 11:30. Is that what they're saying? Okay. Physical abuse. In addition to the initial period of incarceration previously complained of to the court, I'm going to put Dan's face up on the screen instead, just so we remember our victims in our pursuit of justice. In addition to the initial period of incarceration previously complained of to the court, where Mrs. Adelson was placed in a cell with a mattress on the floor where she had to lay without clothing for more than 50 days. From what I'm hearing, that was actually generous to get the mattress on the floor. A lot of those, when they get that, what is it, Ferguson suit, the turtle suit, is also their mattress, and they're just on the floor. And she was meant to be wearing the turtle suit, so it sounds like she just took it off and went commando. Mrs. Adelson has been physically abused and threatened with abuse throughout her incarceration. To understand the nature of some of these issues, it would be helpful for the court to be aware that the shower and bathroom area of the pods at the Leon County Detention Center have no security cameras, for good reason, and not manned with guards for the safety of inmates. So I'm wondering if they're leveraging that information of not having security cameras to allege that's where it happened, right? Because of course you wouldn't have cameras. Well, I mean, some sicko might, but goodness sakes. One of the first acts of physical abuse by another inmate took place while Mrs. Adelson was showering and was of a sexual nature. She thought she was alone in the area while she was showering when all of a sudden she felt another inmate run her hand up her entire spine from just above her buttocks to the area of her neck. The inmate asked Mrs. Adelson if she liked it. And in response, Mrs. Adelson, very frightened, began to scream, which caused the aggressor/inmate to leave the area. Mrs. Adelson did all she could to avoid this woman during the remainder of that inmate's incarceration at Leon County Detention Center. Okay, so she's gone. Did you report it to anyone, Mrs. Adelson? More recently, as Mrs. Adelson was standing in the area of and facing her bunk bed, another inmate slammed into her from behind, knocking Mrs. Adelson into the frame of the bed. This was very painful to Mrs. Adelson. When she turned around and asked why the woman had done that, the inmate replied, ooh, I'm not going to say it. Let me show you guys. Because you got to see it to believe it. When she turned around and asked why the woman had done that, the inmate replied, because you're a effing killer. The most severe and frightening incident to date, however, occurred several months ago and again was in the bathroom area of the pod. Based on the records obtained, the incident occurred on or shortly before October 7th, 2024. Mrs. Adelson was bent over, brushing her teeth with her right hand and leaning on the sink with her left. All of a sudden, she felt her left arm being jerked violently behind and up her back. As she was yanked in that direction, a much larger inmate told her that she knew Mrs. Adelson got canteen and that from now on, she was going to get canteen for her too. I thought canteen is in the prison and it's, maybe I'm mixing it up. Anyway, when Mrs. Adelson tried to ask why she would do that, she was told by the large inmate that she was going to do it. Is it me or do you imagine knuckles popping? That was pitiful. Imagine a mighty knuckle crack. Mrs. Adelson was scared for her life and what more physical harm would come to her if she didn't comply. I don't know, guys. I mean, yeah. From that point forward, this aggressive inmate has instructed Mrs. Adelson what canteen packages she wanted ordered on a weekly basis. Afraid for her life, Mrs. Adelson began telling her husband to order the packages each week. She never told her husband why, and he just assumed Mrs. Adelson wanted the food for herself because the meals provided by Leon County Detention Center are disgusting. Okay. After Mrs. Adelson, I hope they have somebody from the jail at this hearing. After Mrs. Adelson, we love it when jail counsel comes to court. Oh my God. After Mrs. Adelson receives her own canteen purchased through the normal jail site, she also receives the 2 separate packages from the site ordered by her, from her husband. She keeps the additional canteen items in the area of her bunk bed, and either the aggressive inmate comes to get the items herself or sends someone else to get items as she wants. So she's been promoted from aggressive / inmate to aggressive inmate, whoever this woman is. This particular incident caused terrible pain to Mrs. Adelson on the day of the incident and has continued to this day. She has requested medical treatment from the jail for this pain on numerous occasions, but has gotten no relief. No Tylenol? Can you order some Tylenol? Can Harvey order some Tylenol? It has caused excruciating pain in her left shoulder that shoots down her arm, and sometimes she even has a tingling in her finger. Since the court heard the original motion by initial counsel, some jail staff, including supervisors, continue to take actions which can only be intended to punish Mrs. Adelson. For example, inmates are provided with locked storage bins to store commissary and personal items. Mrs. Adelson has been allowed 2 additional bins for her legal materials. On more than one occasion, by 2 different officers, Mrs. Adelson's legal materials have been tossed out of her storage bin, resulting in hundreds of pages being tossed about and left out of order. Guards have commented in the presence of other inmates about Mrs. Adelson's perceived wealth, which led to additional requests by other inmates for Mrs. Adelson's commissary. How did they know the guards have said that? Did she overhear them? Is some inmate going to testify to that? Solitary confinement. Mrs. Adelson has attempted to seek medical care for her pain, shortness of breath, and other health issues for several months, and her requests for appointments have been routinely denied or not properly addressed. However, on Monday, February 3rd, when she was finally taken to the medical unit, and all of her issues, including the cut, were being addressed, the physician's assistant asked about the pain in the left shoulder and arm and how it started. Mrs. Adelson disclosed how she had been attacked by a fellow inmate. Thereafter, without the knowledge of Mrs. Adelson, the medical unit reported the attack to jail personnel. Mandatory reporter. Within a short period of time, 2 supervisors at the jail came into the annex and told Mrs. Adelson to roll up her bed and get her bins because she was being removed from the pod. They explained Mrs. Adelson had done nothing wrong and then took her into a room to question her about the attack. Mrs. Adelson was very reluctant to disclose any information because she truly fears retaliation by the aggressor and or affiliates within the jail, of which she has many that Mrs. Adelson has already had to deal with. Oh God, so she's a bully with the pack. Mrs. Adelson finally disclosed all of the facts, including the extortion by the aggressor and how her husband unknowingly satisfying the demands by purchasing 2 extra packages of canteen each week to spare Mrs. Adelson of additional harm. Note, from October 7th, 2024 to the present, Mrs. Adelson has spent $1,150 on this separate canteen, which that should be easy enough to verify. I might have to get in her commissary business. Oh my goodness. The jail supervisors advised Mrs. Adelson that it was their responsibility to protect her, and the only way they can do that is to put her into solitary confinement. Therefore, since Monday, February 3rd, Mrs. Adelson has been placed in a cell by herself. I heard it was the 6th, the day after her birthday, but maybe it was the 3rd. So she was in there for her birthday. She is only allowed outside her cell on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 1 hour in the morning, and on Tuesday and Thursday for 30 minutes. So you got lockdown 23 and 1, and then what is the other one? 23 and a half. When she is released, she has no contact with anyone else and can only use the time to shower, walk on the rec deck, or watch television. Other than that, she is on a complete lockdown in a 6-foot by 9-foot room that has a bed, a toilet, and a sink. Welcome to jail, Donna. Note, the toilet is in full view of the window on the door that is approximately 4 inches across by 30 inches high. Don't do crimes. Thus, the staff of the Leon County Detention Center has determined that the only way they can adequately protect Mrs. Adelson from any future physical harm from inmates is to house her in solitary confinement. That is not unusual. Like when you have Pedialytes, the Chomos, they are also in that type of confinement for their own protection. Don't kill people. Therefore, Mrs. Adelson is being punished for having been physically attacked, injured, and extorted for the past 4 months. Well, the other option is to lock up the aggressive inmate, but then you said she's got cronies out there, so that does not guarantee your safety. The safest thing to do, like, what is it? They're in the care, custody, and control of Leon County, is for them to put you there. That's the most straightforward. And again, I know, Donna, that you're worried about their resources, and so we don't want to waste extra resources unnecessarily, therefore putting other inmates at risk. Okay, so she's a 75-year-old with physical impediments with no prior criminal history and no disciplinary issues during her entire incarceration at the Leon County Detention Center for the past 14 months. There are no allegations that she personally engaged in any conduct herself that resulted in any harm to anyone, including Mr. Markel. Wait, what? That she personally engaged in it. Okay, so you didn't pull the trigger? Is that what you're saying? Because you personally engaged in the arranging of money and movement and not a flight risk. Mrs. Adelson has no passport and has been placed on a no-flight list and thus cannot schedule a flight bound for any domestic or foreign destination. But what was that? The yoga girl who got on it? Like, she used her sister's passport or something? I can't think of her name. Oh, God. One of them, the one with the curly hair, Mo, was the woman that she unfortunately unalived, but whatever. Yeah, that you not having a passport, you can still leave without a passport, ma'am. Her husband is 80 years old and would relocate to live with Mrs. Adelson in Tallahassee, Florida, from release through the trial. So has he lined up the doctors, the ENT, what is what? Till adjudged guilty, every person charged with a crime or violation of municipal or county ordinance shall be entitled to release on reasonable bail with sufficient surety unless charged with a capital offense or an offense punishable by life imprisonment, and the proof of guilt is evident or the presumption is great. State v. Arthur. So I think it's there. One, she is charged with a capital offense. The first degree murder is the capital offense. And then Judge Everett has seen all the evidence. There is proof, all of her interactions, and or the presumption is great, right? She wrote the checks out to Katie McBanoa. Under what, like, premise? She's alleged to have dropped the money off the wet, freshly laundered, possibly mildewy from not being dried money off to Charlie. Just there's so many things. She bought the TV. They're doing all the calling back and forth for the TV the day of the murder. I mean, the presumption is great. That's what I'm going to say. Every person charged with a crime or violation of municipal or county ordinance shall be entitled to pre-trial release on reasonable conditions. Additionally, the Florida Rules of Criminal Procedure provide that unless the state has filed a motion for pre-trial detention, watch, they're going to file one now, the court shall conduct a hearing to determine pretrial release. The Florida Supreme Court held that the Florida Constitution provides two broad categories in which a person charged with a crime could be denied the right to be released on bond, where the person is accused of a capital crime, which Donna is, or an offense punishable by life, where the proof of guilt is evident and the presumption great. So count one is both a capital crime and also punishable by life. And there is no parole in Florida, in case we have any new people. We went over it with Sarah, but Florida revoked parole, or not revoked, discontinued offering parole in 1983. So there's still a parole board because there are people who were on there prior, right? And it wasn't a retroactive change. So yeah, no parole. Life is life in Florida. Will die there. So where the evidence is arguably strong enough to sustain a conviction, but is arguably impeached in substantial respects by other evidence, or is rendered doubtful by substantial contradictions and discrepancies in the state's case, the proof is not stronger than beyond a reasonable doubt. And accordingly, the accused is entitled to pretrial bail as a matter of right. And they're citing Kirkland 661. So they're going to cite a few of these. If this court agrees bond should be set, Florida Statute 2024, Section 903, provides that the purpose of a bail determination in criminal proceedings is to ensure the appearance of the criminal defendant at subsequent proceedings and to protect the community against unreasonable danger from the criminal defendant. Now, in all honesty, I don't get like a Sarah Boone vibe from Donna in that I think, she would go out and do this again. I think she's certainly sick to death and probably trying to figure out a way to undo it. So I don't know that she's necessarily a danger to society or herself. But I do feel like they're leaning into the old lady bit of it, do you know? And she's had, what, 10 years? He was murdered in 14. She's had 10, almost 11 years of freedom. Clearly, you were involved in some way, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it. So they want the Arthur hearing. Yeah, I'm not going to go through. It's a 15-page. Let me just do the conclusion. In summary, Mrs. Adelson is being held in the Leon County Detention Center awaiting trial under conditions that will result in her inability to receive a fair trial and unable to adequately participate in preparation for her defense at trial. Her health is failing. She is in constant pain. She cannot hear normal discussions, much less any reduced level speaking with counsel at counsel table at trial. Ooh, and she's not receiving a fraction of the amount of sleep necessary to assist in her defense. At this point, Mrs. Adelson is aware that the remainder of her time at the Leon County Detention Center leading up to and during trial, she will be in solitary confinement without any access to interaction with other friendly inmates, art classes, or any other human contact whatsoever, appointments with attorneys accepted. So they'll be able to come in. Her incarceration should have ended upon the conclusion of her trial in September 24, says you. Through no fault of her own, her attorneys were removed from her case, and her trial continued for a period of more than 9 months. So a continuance in time, not continued as in the trial kept going, thus extending her period of incarceration. Proposed conditions of release. Mrs. Adelson is aware of the seriousness. So here's what she's asking for. Electronic monitoring. She'll reside with her husband within Leon County, Tallahassee, Florida, pending the outcome of trial, with the request that the location be shared only with the court, the state, the defense, and the pretrial release officer for the safety of herself and her husband. All right, YouTubers, don't go looking for Donna. Comply with the curfew. Not that we would, but clearly that's for the rest of us. Comply with the curfew at the residence from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., with the only exception being appointments with her attorneys for court or for medical purposes. Man, what medical 7 p.m.? Mm-mm. No travel outside of Leon County. Report to a pretrial release officer on whatever schedule is deemed necessary by the court. Any other conditions the court deems reasonable. So that was signed by Josh Zellman. Jackie Fulford is the one who signed the certificate of service. So I don't think that's that far off, right? Like, we're not super surprised by this. I feel like she's been hinting at it between the attack, the girls who were narcotics enthusiasts, as Kathy would say over a gossip rumor and innuendo. And they, the judge denied that motion. He did not hear, let me just see if I can pull this other one up. No, they're all taking over pages. But basically, he denied the motion for, to compel testimony from the drug addicted women. He said that the defense can do a deposition, the state can be there, and everything can go on. He did not rule on the change of venue. I said that at the top. And then, the other thing, they want to suppress that tape. Is it a tape? I'm saying tape. The audio clip, the MP3 of Donna on the call that I talked to you about at the top of this video. Let me just see if I can pull that up really, really fast. So anyway, the Arthur hearing is now scheduled for the end of February 26th, if I'm reading this right. There's a case management today at 2:30, which will be happening by the time I get this video out to you. And then there is motion set 226 is the hearing to hear this motion. So motion to perpetuate testimony denied, change of venue not addressed, language, witnesses may be unable to attend is what they said. And he just said defense to subpoena the witnesses. So just like the normal process, he's not making any exceptions for them, which, okay, you guys even see that. So that was what came out of the other hearing. So on January 29th, notice of pretrial case management. So pretrial case management, a capias for the defendant's arrest will be issued if they fail to appear. What? Does that foreshadow that she might be out? This is May 16th, 9 a.m. That might be too far out to hear this other one. That is what is going on with Miss Donna Adelson. So the motion to suppress the voice, which I don't know what the motion will be. She's it. You know, when you have a jail call, it clearly says it's being recorded and you have no expectation of privacy. And the fact that you didn't hang up, that, I mean, that's on you, right? That's not, you didn't hang up because you thought it was still connected and you would hear him soon. So you had to have a sense of what you were saying would be recorded. Now, maybe she forgot that she was still on there, because I think at the end of it, we'll listen to it. Someone said, like, hey, whose phone is this? But she was ranting about Wendy, and she was, you know, that was when everyone was like, did she say I didn't say she was involved or whatever? We were all trying to interpret what she said about Wendy, like if she had implicated her or not. She definitely implicated Rashbaum. So I see why they want that out. Take out all the evidence that makes me look guilty. Because that right there, while the defense is saying, oh, it's preposterous that after 9 years of this murder happening that now she's leaving. But the tipping point was Charlie getting arrested and saying he should have followed his instincts, which we all interpreted as he should have got the hell out of Dodge and gone to Vietnam or wherever, anywhere but here, to be held responsible. And so that got her brain ticking, and she gets a one-way ticket to Vietnam for vacation. So it'll be interesting. I'm sure they'll pull up like how many other times has she gone one way. If they pull mine, I fly one way a lot, just because sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't know when I want to go back. So yeah, it's possible, but you'd have to have that pattern. Like if you pull my Delta account, you would see that pattern over the last 20 years or 17 years or so. No, it's more than that because I've been in New York 17 years. So yeah, about 20 years. So is that a pattern of Donna's? Is that a thing? I don't think the judge is going to throw out that phone call. Even if he did, it'll be considered for this motion, right, of that happening. And that's how, I mean, throwing it out is hard because it's part of what got her indictment. Do you know it was one of those foundational things? I mean, I guess you can still ask. I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer. I mean, they're going to have to throw out a whole lot, all those nasty emails and all of the recordings with the hitman, the bump man or whatever. And it just, yeah, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. She has every reason to flee. She's already tried once. She's looking at she's looking at dying in prison. Do you know? She's had a great life, and that's how you go out. It's rough. But again, don't do crimes. I mean, just don't do it. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Toodles!